is my office, but where I keep a lot of Russian things in here.
It's a monument to Cold War espionage in the home of Rolf Moet Larsen, a former CIA spy.
So I painstakingly collected these sets of medals for years. And the Russians know I did this. In fact, the KGB, as a farewell present when I left Moscow, gave me one of the ones I didn't have.
Russia would soon declare him persona non grata.
Why were you expelled from Russia?
I walked up to a very senior SVR, which is their foreign intelligence officer in Switzerland. In fact, he was their chief in Switzerland. And I offered him $1 million to work with CIA to catch American spies working for the Russians, and they were very upset about it.
He says he was still on Russia's terrorist watch list in 2009 when he flew to Moscow with retired U.S. Brigadier General Kevin Ryan. Together, they asked the former Russian Minister of the Interior and Army General Anatoly Kulikov a surprising question. Could they work with him and other Russian adversaries?
People who are architects of wars, people who are patriots to their country, who will put their finger in your chest to make a point, but also will stand there and take a response from us when we do so in kind.
And so began a face-to-face collaboration between retired senior spies and 3- and 4-star generals from the U.S. and Russia. They call themselves the Elbe Group, named after the German river where U.S. and Soviet forces met in the last days of World War II.
Increasing presence in the Caucasus, which the U.S. I think can help.
Its participants include the former heads of the U.S. and Russian military intelligence agencies, the former chief of Russia's nuclear forces, and the former head of U.S. Central Command, all men who had previously faced off in the Cold War.
Our past with us and the Russians is so shared. They and we know it well, and it's been so bloody and so difficult and so monumental that we had that as a starting point for every conversation we had.
Okay, that's Istanbul. That's our very first meeting. General Douglas Lute, who was also U.S. ambassador to NATO, and he's talking to General Kulikov. General Kulikov, he never arrived to an Elbe Group meeting without a couple of jokes to use at the table when we would have our dinners.
What were some of those jokes?
He said, comrades, for a long time now we have stood at the precipice, but today we take a step forward. And his joke was that in taking a step forward in our relationship, that could be a good outcome or it could be falling off the cliff.
In 2011, the Elbe Group did something that Washington and Moscow had never been able to achieve together. They wrote a groundbreaking joint report assessing that terrorists could potentially acquire material for a nuclear weapon.
I'm not talking about a dirty bomb, but something with a mushroom cloud.
Was there any fear that you could be poisoned, that there was surveillance? Were you hesitant to bring your cell phone?
Well, when you get, yes. There is always fears of these things because you don't ever let your guard down completely. And I hope they feel the same way.
The group is housed here at Harvard University's Belfer Center. But over the years, their meetings have been held in neutral countries and during the pandemic by Zoom. Its participants are so esteemed, their conversations have been relayed to senior officials at the White House and Pentagon and to Vladimir Putin's closest advisors. At Harvard, we spoke with Graham Allison, one of America's foremost national security thinkers.
Good intelligence officers are great at trying to help you do what they call strategic empathy, in which I try to look at the world through your lenses, from your perspective. And that doesn't mean I agree with it at all.
Allison says that is one of the Elbe Group's greatest strengths, or it used to be, because the group has not gathered since Russia waged war on Ukraine. The Americans told the Russians they wouldn't meet until the fighting ended, though the former officers might have helped provide insight to hasten the war's end.
Trying to understand where and when Putin might be prepared for some extended cessation of hostilities is certainly one of the big puzzles, and one where if the Elbe Group were meeting today and the Russian participants were there, I would be trying to get some clues. They may not want to say, but if you listen and carefully, you might discover.
Ryan says that year by year, under Putin and his inner circle, Russia has retreated to Soviet thinking.
There have always been two voices in the Russian polity or government. One saying you can't work with the West, the other saying we can. The one that said we can, that was the predominant voice, the loudest voice in the 1990s. With Putin's arrival, the other voice became dominant. The voice that said we cannot trust the West, we cannot work with the United States.
Could you trust the Russians?
Well, trust for an intelligence officer is a difficult term to sort of conclusively address. It's a profession filled with manipulation, betrayal. On a human level, I like them. And it was a real pleasure to meet around the world, and we joked together, we told stories. At every dinner, we would have a series of vignettes. Russian toasting is famous, and we would all partake in that. We did have a lot of arguments.
The Russian members declined to be interviewed for this story. And just as an end to the war remains uncertain, so is the future of this small, singular group.
We can no longer pretend we're just colleagues trying to bridge differences as we used to do, because this war is black and white. This war is good and evil. It's that simple.
Sasha Ingber, Scripps News, Boston.